We're live.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Dr. Adityanji, and I'm the president of ICHRRF, International Commission for Human Rights and Religious Freedom. Today is Sunday, May 26. It is 10 a.m. Eastern Daytime in United States, and we are meeting here for our monthly Speaking Up series. So on behalf of the Board of Directors and the executive team of the ICHRRF, I invite all our audience members to yet another lecture in the ICHRRF Speaking Up series. This is the logo of the ICHRRF. A little bit about the organization. International Commission for Human Rights and Religious Freedom is a US-based nonprofit focused on upholding human rights and religious freedom through continuous monitoring, policy intervention, and collaboration. We are focused on educational, research, legal, and human rights advocacy and charitable purposes, and strive to be an advocate for the human rights and religious freedom of underrepresented communities across the world. We believe that humankind can no longer afford to be selectively vocal about the rights of only a specific set of people. A humane and just world necessitates fair treatment of all living beings. Our focus is on indigenous rights and freedom, free speech, and their cultural preservation. Some of our initiatives include monitoring violations of freedoms and sanctity of religious and philosophical minorities across the world, research into documentation of the culture, history, challenges faced by such communities, policies, recommendations on human rights, religious diversity, and pluralism to international organizations, agencies, national and local governments, collaboration to support the cultural and philosophical diversity across the world, conducting special hearings on human rights violations, Professor Vedpi Nanda Memorial Fellowship Training Program, Forgotten Genocide Convention, and publication of books through ICHRRF Press. The topic for today's lecture in the Speaking Up series is Roma slavery and human rights violations. Our distinguished speaker today is Dr. Julieta Rotaru. And that's the picture of Dr. Rotaru. A little bit about the topic. And our speaker, Dr. Rotaru, is an academician. She's an expert and a teacher of philology and linguistics. She knows multiple languages, including Sanskrit, Romani, English, Hindi, Chib, etc. She's a well-known figure in Vedic studies and Romani studies. She is essentially a researcher and academic. She has a PhD degree in Sanskrit. She has published analysis and research in topics ranging from history, historical demography, migration, discrimination, and slavery, with a special interest in Roma/Gypsy people. She has conducted original research on the often forgotten and not discussed topic of Roma slavery. Originally, Dr. Rotaru comes from Bucharest, Romania. She is currently based in Paris for her academic work and currently traveling in India and Pune. So just a picture about Roma people. Roma slavery and persecution. The Roma are known as having migrated from India in the 11th century due to Muslim invasions, but many have remained in Asia where they are considered foreigners and often marginalized and given oriental names as Jats, Luris, Nuris, Kaoli people of Kabul, Sindi inhabitants from Indus, Multani, the wanderers of Multan. By 13th century, some Roma groups reached Eastern Europe, later moving to West where they were clubbed with various names, implying foreigners or misread Gypsies, Tsiganes, Bohémiens, Gitans, Romanichels, Tatars, etc. In Balkans, they assimilated more, adopting names based on professions. In Romania, where arable land was vast and workforce was sparse, they were enslaved. The Roma slavery is a topic insufficiently studied in mainstream slavery research because the focus has been pretty much on slavery of African Americans. The Roma slavery was not recognized in the Romanian communist historiography, although the Marxist historians question what binds oppression and the regime of production. Nowadays, the question of compensation is raised not only as a trauma reparation, but also as an explanation of the development of segregation and discrimination against. This presentation will aim to shed light on ongoing research into Roma slavery within regional contexts. The lecture would be followed by questions and answers. A few of the housekeeping rules. I would expect everyone to mute themselves to avoid noise interference. Please change your cell phone setting to vibration mode. Please do not interrupt our esteemed speaker when she is speaking. Only those members of the audience who identify themselves openly will be allowed to pose questions. No anonymous questioners, please. All the questions have to be moderated through the chat room. So please send your questions through the chat room. Please be very specific and precise in asking a question. Don't send lengthy comments in the form of a monologue because we will not address that then. This event is being recorded and it will be available on our YouTube channel as well as on our website within next 24 hours. And I must say, it's a distinct honor and privilege to introduce an expert, a scholar, and academician of the caliber of Dr. Julieta Rotaru. I went through her resume, and I'm not going to spend time actually going through that. So the proof of pudding lies in eating. Here is Dr. Rotaru for all of you to listen to on a very neglected topic of Roma slavery. Dr. Rotaru, the floor is yours.
Namaskar. Thank you very much, President and Chairperson Adityanji G and Dr. Karl Clemens, for your kind invitation. And thank you to all of you, to our audience, for joining us on this Sunday morning or Sunday afternoon, wherever you are, joining us to listen to this presentation on a topic which is, as Professor Adityanji G said, not well enough addressed. But which tinges to the topic proposed by your institute, the human rights violations. I will start exactly with explaining the juxtaposition of Roma slavery and human rights violations, where is the violations occurs. It's historical, first of all. It's a historical slavery. I'm not going to talk about, it's not about modern day slavery. This should be said from the outset. But it's a very topical subject, nevertheless, although it's history, because in just 3 years ago, in 2021, the European Council and presidents of European countries assembled in Brussels and celebrated 20 years since one legislation called Taubira Bill, which recognized the colonial trafficking and the slavery as a crime against humanity. This Taubira law, first of all, Taubira was Christiane Taubira, was a French of extraction, Cayenne. She was born in Cayenne in Guyana, and she was former Minister of Justice in France. So Taubira, from her position, she proposed this law, which carries her name, which later on developed in UK Modern Slavery Act, which was voted in 2015, which covers all topic of modern slavery. In 2021, just 3 years ago, when this jubilee of 20 years was celebrated in Europe, one big encyclopedia of slavery was published, 1,200 or 300 pages in France, and with chapters referring to all sorts of slavery, hegemonic slavery like antiquity, antique, Islamic, American plantation slavery, even all range of restriction of social liberty, and in regions which were never ever studied before. Nevertheless, from this big encyclopedia, one important chapter was missing, Roma slavery. I contacted the editor and I never received an answer, but I already know it because most of the contributors to the Encyclopedia of Slavery were historians, and if historians, they do not have sources, they will not attack the subject. Right now, I'm going to present the result of a 6 years funded project. It was a project funded by a Swedish university, Swedish agency in Stockholm. I carried the research upon demographic and archival sources based in Bucharest, the sources, together with a historian, demographer historian, David Gaunt. And the results I'm going to present today. I will share my screen with you. All right. So I said it's a quantitative and qualitative socioeconomic investigation. Quantitative because it's sourced on archival sources, medieval documents published and some unpublished, which are in Romania. So the specificity of Romania is that our archives, we have our memory with us. For instance, in the neighboring countries like Bulgaria and Serbia, the archives, because they were part of the Ottoman empires, the medieval documents, they are not in their collections, but most of them are in Turkey. For Transylvania, which is part of Romania, the memory is not in Romania, but is in Vienna, and so on. We are lucky, we have our memory with us, so the documents are in our archives, and that's what we did. What is the problem and why Roma slavery is not very well anchored in the slavery studies? And it's somehow contested. Why do you call it slavery? Why don't you call it servitude? You will see at the end of my presentation why is it slavery. First of all, a definition, because there are multiple definitions of slavery from the point of view of historians, jurists, economists, anthropologists. One of them is the right of the ownership exercised by the master over the slave, and the exercise of power over the whole person in slaves differentiates this status from all other conditions of dependence, such as servitude, as I said. And this is actually the legal framework of the definition stipulated by the Geneva Convention of Human Rights. Its very first article, slavery is the status or condition of an individual over whom the right of ownership or one of them is exercised. Well, there is another definition. There are many, but a second one, which I want to underline, is about dishonor, civil death, the act of expelling slaves from the constitutive dimension of social life in order to obtain large profits. The act of ownership over slaves become a secondary issue in this case, but nevertheless, it's a dishonor and hence a civil death. Slaves were victims of a state system that built a whole gear of power, justice, and police to destroy in people their dignity, their personality, and their memory. This definition also applies to Roma people in Romania, but nowadays this aspect is, for instance, taken into consideration when the Harvard group from Health and Human Rights Center of the Harvard University speaks about intergenerational trauma resulting from this slavery. So they have envisioned this aspect. So I'm not going to talk about it because here it needs another expertise, psychology, and I'm going to speak about history. How did it happen? So the Roma slavery is not anchored in the research of slavery studies. Nevertheless, there is a historiography. What do I mean? We know the duration of Roma slavery. So it lasted from the moment the Roma people came to Romania. I will show you. This is Romania. Here is Romania. See, three historical provinces: Wallachia, Moldavia, and Transylvania. Transylvania was a part of Austrian Empire, so it does not count in our presentation. We speak about Wallachia and Moldavia. At the south, you see the Ottoman Empire. When Roma people came from India, they arrived in Byzantium maybe in the between 10th to 11th century. That is a fact, historical fact, uncontested. And then from Byzantium, from Byzantine Empire, where they are recorded, they made it to Eastern Europe in the Balkans. And the first document that mentions the presence of the Roma in the Balkans, it's a donation act hailing from 14th century, 1348, hailing from Kosovo, nowadays Kosovo, Prizren Monastery. You will see in my presentation the Roma people, the Gypsy people, the so-called Gypsy people, they are always in the vicinity of monasteries, of churches, Orthodox, Christian Orthodox, Eastern Orthodox. And probably you will be surprised that these pious monasteries were actually one of the biggest owners of slaves in this region. This is the first attestation in the Balkan. Then from south of Danube, here is Danube, where I point out the biggest, one of the biggest rivers of Europe. And at north of Danube, it's Romania, nowadays Romania. So they crossed the Danube, and here they became slaves. Here, there are no written documents or archaeological evidence of the beginning of the migration of Roma to Romanian territories. But in 1335, so not far from the first attestation in Prizren in Kosovo, we have the first attestation in Wallachia of the first donation of households Sălașe de Țigani. First of all, the name of Roma people in Romania and in Romanian document, it's Tsigan, with the appellative Țigan, which comes from Atinhanos, from the Greek Atinhanos, which is untouchable. So this is the first attestation. Depending on the ownership, there were three categories of rob slaves. The name of the slave in Romanian language is rob, which comes from Slav, means worker. So there were slaves belonging to the crown or the state, the prince. Second category is that belonging to the clergy, monasteries, churches, and my colleague and I, it's for the first time we found evidence that not only the Christian Eastern Orthodox, but even the Catholic churches, which were based in Romania, had Gypsy slaves. So whomsoever had a quarter here, they had gypsy slaves in their ownership. And the third category, and the largest, was that of private slaves. Who were those privates? They were boyars or aristocrats, lower nobility, wealthy citizen, city dwellers, owners of pre-industrial companies, and so on. One aspect should be contemplated from the outset. There was neither slave trade nor sell markets. That's what I want to call your attention. That's one of the reasons the gypsy slavery is not that evident, because we don't have the image of the plantation type of slavery with chains, markets. Yes, is not that visible. That doesn't imply that it was not there. Not at all. You will see in my presentation what was their life condition. So, were there sales? Yes, they were sold out, and the sales were made through direct transactions, and most of the time only when the owner found himself in a precarious financial situation. Now, what is the origins of Roma slavery? Because I told you they came from Byzance to south of Romania to the Balkans, and from the Balkans they came to Romania. So what is the origins? Did they come already slaves, or they were free? This is the question. One of the hypotheses is that they were already slaves, and then they were given to monasteries, or they were free and they were enslaved. In one of the books which I recently published together with my colleague, I will try to see if the internet, here is a link, it doesn't go, open link, I published. We have a special chapter in which we analyze the second largest, so this is the book. Oh, here we have one chapter about the terminology of slavery. What does it mean, rob? What robs, Tsigan, slavery, see? And here in this book, we have analyzed actually the second largest donation of Gypsy, of Roma, to a monastery. It was done in 1388 by the ruler of Wallachia of that time, through a so-called pious donation, between quotation mark. It means out of pious feelings of karuni, the ruler gave to the monastery 300 households of Gypsy. It's a huge amount of people for that time, 300 Roms to the monastery. So we have came to the conclusion that actually before this donation, these people were free. In the beginning, it was not a very strong ownership. The ruler gave these 300 households of Roma to the monastery of Kozia on the auriferous river Olt, in order to administer them and to actually exploit them, because they were extracting gold from the river beds. Olt, even nowadays, is one of the rivers which flows from Transylvania towards Danube, and it buries gold flakes. So these people were actually gold panning. They were panning for gold in the riverbeds. And well, the ruler of Wallachia just assembled the 300 households. So you can multiply or 4, because 300 means only the head of the family it's recorded. So around 1,200 people, they were put under the administration of a monastery. So this is what we can record as the one of the ways of enslaving Roma people, through pious donation. So they were free, and so I call it the pious donation as a vector of the institution of Roma slavery in the Romanian principalities. In the Middle Ages, all slaves were the property of the crown, and they were not sold but given away. And secondly, the ecclesiastical and aristocratic property only appeared through donation. And collapse video. And here you see in this table what is actually the status of slavery in figures, in numbers. So we have digitalized for the first time, and it's available online, www.maprum.se, the first census of the population of Romania, which was done in 1838. And we extracted from this census of the population only the Roma, the Gypsy households. So based on that, we have nowadays these statistics. As you can see here, majority of Roma people were slaves. You can start from the bottom. We have 12,000 households. This means around 40,000 individuals. I know you may say that it's not much, but you have to take into consideration that this is only one province of Romania, it's not the entire Romania. So if we add Moldavia, that will be double. And you have to also take into consideration that Wallachia and Europe, it was sparsely populated. Nevertheless, this Roma population represented 7 to 8% of the entire population. Although they were migrant, although they just came and settled from India across Asia, and nevertheless, they represented 7 to 8% of the entire population. So from the bottom, please look the situation. Free taxpayers means free. Only 79 households. That's nothing. Some were ransomed by themselves, 16. Some, 6 families, were ransomed by the village. What does it mean? That they were outstanding Roma people, and villagers decided to ransom them and pay for their freedom. And then we have 1,500 households who belonged to the state or to the prince, to the crown. And then the second largest is monasteries and churches, almost 5,000 households. It's a lot. And then the private one, 6,000. The novelty of our study is that we have traced the name of the monasteries and the name of the boyar and nobles who have owned the slaves. Because if we are talking about slavery, about compensating the effects of slavery in nowadays Romani communities in Romania and elsewhere, because they might be from origin or Romanian extraction, but living elsewhere, but they feel that they were victims of this regime. So if we talk about compensation, we need to know the lists of honors, as it is done in slavery studies. So for the first time, David Gaunt and we have identified the names of those honors in proportion of 60%. It's not much. We could do more, and probably we'll do it. Which were the rights of the slaves, nevertheless? Did they have some rights? In theory, yes. They had a right to possess property, to supply and hire labor for personal use. And we see sometimes Roma, wealthy Roma family of blacksmith in 19th century, who hired other Roma in their workshop to help around. Another right of a slave was to conclude contracts with an honor, contracts for to work on arable land under a regulation. another right was to rent spaces for workshops and to have an education and hold positions in civil and ecclesiastical administration, which actually happened. We found very few cases, but we found of vertical mobility, social mobility of Roma people. Well, as you can see, there is no place for ownership here. Everything was rent, contracts. So this, because they were slaves, they did not own anything. They didn't possess anything. So these were the rights. But let's see what happened when transcribed into figures. What our census of the population of the 19th century, when Roma people were close to emancipation, happened. So when were they emancipated? This is a question which I should have stated from the beginning. They were emancipated in the 1850s under the ideas of the French Revolution and the emancipation of the colonies. So it's in the same wave, and it is considered that Roma people were the last slaves within Europe. If this is true or not, nowadays is contested. There are historians who think that even in Malta, there were, for instance, slaves taken from Muslim countries, from Maghreb region in the 19th century. But nevertheless, they were among the last slaves in Europe. I'm not talking about slavery outside Europe, which was a big, big shame of the time. And finally, they were emancipated in Romania as well. So let's see what is the economic situation of Roma people in 1838, so only a few years before their emancipation from slavery. Were they rich or poor? As you can see from this table, they were living in absolute poverty if compared to majority population. Significant economic resources available to Roma households in the lowlands and highlands compared to the average of all rural households in Wallachia. Let's start with the land in acres. So total rural population here, you can see 4.3 for majority for surrounding population, whereas the Roma had 1.3 in lowland and in highland 1.2. So disparity is visible. Horses, they are almost the same. Oxen, they are poorer. Cows, so their dairy products, they were suffering. As you can see, it's half of what the surrounding population have. Same for sheep, goats, pigs, and one important thing is beehives. Probably you think it's a detail which is bears no importance. Actually, it does, because the beehives, it shows a sedentary lifestyle. So it shows, and it also inclusion. It's a profession which was specific to ancient Romanians, to Dacians. So the fact that we find Roma people having beehives is very telling about their integration in Romanian society of that time. They had fruit trees, plum trees, of course, plum trees. The alcoholization of Romania was very big. From plum, they made alcohol. So as you can see here, the Roma are on the pair with Romanian. So this is the situation of absolute poverty. Then I want to highlight some visible, because when we talk about Roma slavery, and there is this lack of sources and lack of representation and I will exactly show you what do I mean by, see, lack of representation of slavery. Do you see on the left side, we have a poster. This is a poster of sailing of a household of Roma people. This poster was put on the market by our friend and academician Jan Hancock. He's a linguist, historian. He lived in and taught in the University of Texas. I think now he has retired, Jan Hancock. He wrote in the Pariah Syndrome in 1987. He put up this poster, which later on it was revealed that in fact it's not true. It's fake. Mystification. Why mystification? Why mystifying? Why? Because he wanted to pull the signal. It was 1987. Nobody talked about Roma slavery by that time. So Jan Hancock, he wanted to, the title is very telling, the Pariah Syndrome means the marginalization of Roma people. So marginalization of Roma people and marginalization of studies of Roma slavery. So not having sources, he created sort of his own sources, and he came up with this poster, which although it's a fraud, it's forged, nevertheless is very telling about the problem which is behind this invention of the poster. The fact that the Roma slavery doesn't have a voice. So this leads to mystification. And on the right side, you see another mystification which was done during the French Revolution. It's a painting anonymously painted by somebody in 18th century, but it's forged after a very famous painting of Antoine Watteau. What is the specificity of this? A young white woman getting up, she's assisted in her intimate toilet by a black slave, as you can see. So the difference with the original is that the replacement of the white servant with a young woman of another ethnicity. So the painting is a revolutionary seizure, and I saw it in Le Musée du Nouveau Monde from La Rochelle, France. So such mystifications, they happened in the slavery studies. It's good for pulling the attention on the cruelty of this condition, deprivation of liberty after all. Now I will turn back to my presentation, and I want to show you some of the not so visible but nevertheless attested representation of slavery, abuses. So as you could see, they could have rights, but were their rights protected? Who protected the rights of the slaves? And here you see 9 documented abuses which were done against the slaves. The tax of grain levied in grain and not in sheaves. Weighing carried out with falsified units, larger than legal ones. Tithe of grains measured with falsified instruments. I'm going through this. I'm not reading all of them because of lack of time. The last one, if you can read, money were demanded for leaves plucked from the trees as animal fodder. So this was sheer cruelty. Then I have other documented examples of brute force and humiliation. So for all these examples, I have found them in documents, and I have presented them with the right references and even published them. Whipping with a whip made from bull's posterior cervical ligament, putting hot eggs under the armpits, tying the neck by the chain and forcing to graze on grass and lick salt, whipping with nettles, smearing with cow dung and charcoal. Well, this is in some culture it can be good, but not in this context. And charcoal together with their wives. The old ones were shaved and forced to bark like dogs and so on. These are the humiliation which they undergone. Now, few words about coexistence and cohabitation. So were there Romani colonies? Were they living in colonies or they lived in mixed settlements? As you can see in this table, the situation is like that. I think I have to conclude in 5 minutes.
Yes, that would be fine, Dr. Rotaru.
Yeah. All right. The situation is like that. From the bottom of my list, you see, no, they were not living in colonies. See, 500 households is huge for that time, huge. 500 households multiplied of 4, which means almost 2,000 people. There are only 3 such localities. No. Roma people lived in mixed settlements with majority population. And here is the situation, because the question is, how did they live? You know, in demography, it's important if they live as nuclear household, so father, mother, and children, or extended, bara parivar, extended households. The situation is like that. They didn't like extended households. They lived in nuclear households. And this is an exception because there is a demographer, Hainal, who has set up a line, virtual line from St. Petersburg to Trieste and said, whatever comes to the west, means Western Europe, west of this line, they live in nuclear households. Whatever sides on the east, Romania included, Bulgaria, all the Eastern European countries, they side with the extended household model. But no, here we have the Romani people who loved to live in nuclear household. Actually, we should not be very happy about the fact, which contradicts nowadays situation, because nowadays Romani people in Romania and elsewhere, they like to live in extended households. Why was the situation different in 19th century? Why did they prefer nuclear households? The reason is economic. That's where they actually lived. On the left, you have on the right, you have tents. So they can, only a nuclear family can inhabit such a small place. And on the left side, you have a typical Romanian and Southeastern European kind of habitation, earth dug huts. Huh? This is a very healthy and healthy one, but usually there are poorer and smaller. So as you can see, the economic dictate over the style of habitation. This is the situation of their marriages, how they married and they have children. This was the reason for conducting and to have marriage. Now I want to speak something about ethnic attitudes. Were there any mixed marriages? I don't know if you see this. So we found only less than 100, we found something like 37 mixed marriages, means Roma people marrying other ethnicity, Romanian or Serbian or whatever ethnicity live there. So we found 38 cases out of more than 10,000 marriages. And why they did not marry, we found in questionnaire the answer why they did not marry Roma people. It's here. Such marriages do not happen. It rarely happens, and especially when a gypsy would have something more special than other men. He can take a poor orphan girl, but if she is not an orphan, marriage is not possible. So here, what you have, 6 points, are actually the voices of the Romanian or majority population, the voices in 19th century. Their voices, they speak here through this, and you can see the ethnic attitudes are not that good and in favor of mixed marriages. Look here at number 3. It's a sin. It's a sin to marry with a gypsy. At number 4, it happens, but always between a Romanian girl and a gypsy boy, and never between a Romanian boy and a gypsy girl. The people consideration is contemptuous. So it was not very honorable, considered honorable. Then employability, gypsies had, Roma had different occupations and skill like blacksmithery, other crafts, musicians, agriculture, and so on. Here are their, yes, I think I will stop here. With my presentation on the Roma slavery, and I'm open for question because I'm sure that many things remained as a question more than an explanation, and I apologize because the time is short, and as I said, it's all work in progress, not from our part. We have extensive data, we have published already, but we have to go slowly in presenting this new subject as Roma slavery, because the juxtaposition of the two terms, what is Roma and what is slavery, sometimes it raises question. Why do you call this slavery? Why is not servitude? And I think I gave you enough reason, and one of them is Geneva Convention. These people were not free to choose their life. They belonged to an owner, and you saw the 3 types of owners. To conclude, the 3 types of owners, one was the crown, the state, the second was the church, monasteries and churches, and the third and the biggest were private owners. And now the question is to identify these owners, and if the question of compensation is being raised, it's important to have the list of these owners. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed, Dr. Julieta Rotaru, for a evidence-based, data-based presentation on Roma slavery. And as you have said, that it is a very new topic, because essentially the academic community is focused on slavery, mainly about from African continent into European as well as American continent. So the topic and the notion of Roma slavery is essentially a new concept to be researched. And I really thank you for making it evidence-based and data-based. So that is good work that you're doing, trying to analyze and call spade a spade. There are a number of questions in the chat room. Before I go to those questions, I have a couple of questions of my own. One is whether this slavery was transgenerational. The children born in Roma households, were supposed to continue to serve the same owner, whether it was a monastery or a noble or something like that?
Yes. Should
Okay.
I reply to your question or collect? Yeah. Thank you so much for this wonderful question, and it's actually the core question. because this defines their condition of slaves. Was it intergenerational? Of course. Like in chattel slavery. Chattel slavery, we already know a lot about. It's the American plantation model. Yes, they were born slave and the slavery was inherited. And as you saw in my presentation, there were no mixed marriages, because if a Roma slave married with a Romanian who was not slave, the woman did not come a slave, but their children were slaves. So it increased the capital, because, you know, we have slavery in the word capital itself, you know, capital, chapter, but I will not, I'm a linguist and I like the etymologies. Thank you so much for this question. It's at the core of the definition of Roma slavery. Yes, it was transmitted.
The second question that I have is, people sometimes actually date the origin back to 8th century, even earlier than 10th actually, of the migration from state of Rajasthan to northwest Punjab, then westwards. The question I have is that although there are linguistic similarities between Indo-Aryan languages and Roma language, what about the religion? Were Roma people allowed to practice their own religion in Eastern Europe and Western Europe, or they were forced to adopt whatever branch of Christianity that was invoked there?
Another very good question. Thank you so much. So we don't know the exact moment of when the Roma left India. And in my opinion, and which is not actually my opinion, there were many opinions before me, maybe more knowledgeable. The Roma people left India in many waves. They did not go all of a sudden to India. But what we have is the first time when they became visible in Europe. That's what we recorded. So that's why we say, oh, okay, 10th century they were in Byzance and they were at Tsiganes, they were, okay, 14th century they were in Paris because they became visible when they reached the gates of Saint Denis. It was a colorful mob. So this is the time when they became visible, but maybe they were there much before. But anyhow, when they left India, were they Hindus? Were they, what were them? See, we have, so that's one part of the question. And second, what happened with their religiosity in the country of destination? For their ancestral religiosity, I studied the folklore of 19th century and I edited their folklore, and I can clearly see traces of Hinduism, Hindu beliefs, even some ancestral form of Hinduism dating back to the Vedic times. If we speak about Vedic times, there we have also the Dravidian culture, which was incorporated. So what we see in the fairy tales of Roma people in their songs, it is a link with yeah, Indian culture. What happened with their religiosity in the destination country? It's a long debate, because there is a scholar, Alexander Paspati, who analyzed them in Turkey and in 19th century and said, oh, these people, they have no religious feelings at all. They are neither Muslim, neither Christians. They take everything for granted, but they don't believe. No, in Romania, and I published such study, they were very faithful. So if they converted to Islam, they were really practicing Islam. I wrote, for instance, an article about the Turkish Gypsies in Romania in 17th, 18th century. You can imagine Romania by that time was an Orthodox, Eastern Orthodox country. It was so difficult to be a Muslim in that country. Nevertheless, they kept their religions almost at the margin of illegality, you know, because there was no imam. There was no imam in Wallachia. So persons were crossing the Danube from the Ottoman Empire going to Wallachia to assist the Turkish gypsy who were Muslim to do their sunnit. Sunnit means the circumcision. So is this enough proof that these Roma people were religious? For me, yes. I mean, in spite of the difficulties of living in an Orthodox, Christian Orthodox, they kept their faith. So yes, they adopted very well, and it was a sort of syncretism. Thank you very much.
For that. Before I read questions from the chat room, our Director of Research, Professor Vemsani, wants to ask you a question and make a comment. Professor Vemsani.
Thank you, Adityanji, for Dr. Adityanji, for letting me ask the question. So, Dr. Rotaru, thank you very much for your presentation. It's really, really great presentation. We, with a lot of data and information, we all really enjoyed it. And I really particularly enjoyed the word, the term you used, the Bada Parivar. Bada Parivar is the is the symbol of Indian culture. Yeah, so we really enjoyed it. Very nice presentation. I really enjoyed it. My question was, with everything, it's getting lost. So this is in 18th century, and most of the information data is from 13th, 14th centuries, and it continued. And it was, of course, outlawed in 1850s after the emancipation happening across the world. So what happens after 1850? Did you focus on it, or your focus is more on before 1850, pre-modern slavery?
Yes, you are right. After 1850, we did not study it because that period is actually very well studied. That's what I call historiography. Is there any historiography of Roma slavery? Yes. And that is after 1850, because all the historians, pre-modern historians, they started to write how bad is the slavery, but how good is the Roma slavery in comparison with other types of slavery, yes? And this period is better studied, so we were not interested in this. But do you have a particular question about this? Do you want to know what happened with the Roma people after emancipation? They were left out. They were left out of any possibilities of disorganized, and it was not a very well planned emancipation, and it was a total failure. We have Roma slaves coming back to the owners and asking, please, begging them, please accept me, master, because I don't have where to go. So it was a very bad planned emancipation, which resulted to even poorer conditions. And then it came the reform of, they were allotted land, but because they were very poor, they sold the land. Yeah, they sold out their land, so they became poor.
So emancipation without reparation and rehabilitation and resettlement was a failure.
Yeah,
absolutely. Yes.
That's more important for them to get reparations, at least now, because they were wronged for centuries, not for 100 years, 50 years. It's many centuries. So they really need to get reparations.
Let's move on to the next question. And Carl, can you ask your question directly, please?
Doctor, I just was wondering, are there ancestral Romani communities left behind in the Middle East or in the Maghreb? And what was their status as they migrated through the Ottoman Empire and Persia and Arabia and so forth?
In Maghreb, I don't know. Do you mean if while traveling from India to Byzance, if we have, yes, we have all the communities which are now Dom, Lom speakers, Domari, which is another language, not dialect of India. Then we even have a very interesting group, Zargari Gypsy people who were in the Balkans, and they went back to origins, Zargari. Yeah, now they are in Asia, in Iran. So we have Zargari group and Zargari language. Yes.
Were they also treated as slaves in the Middle East, or were they free migrants?
I have no data about it. I have not studied this, and I don't know if there are sources.
I can add to this one. They were all slaves because when the Islamic State was established, Qutbuddin Aibak actually established many slave markets in the Sultanate. The biggest slave market was actually in Pakistan at that time. So lots of the people that were sent out were actually captured on their invasions into India, into Rajasthan, and all these places. So they were all, people put them in one ethnic group, but they're all taken from many ethnic groups. Whoever were captured were sold. Most of them were put in the military front to die when the war begins, but families and weaker groups were actually sold out. So the word migration to use here is wrong. They were actually captured and sold. So they began as slaves from the borders of Sultanate.
I see. So they became slaves, and when they reached Europe, they were already with the status of slave. You think so?
Oh, large slave markets. Oh, you can't imagine how large these slave markets were, how many people were captured and sold. The Islamic sources, many Muslim sources actually mention in each invasion how many people were captured and how many people were taken and all that. So it's well established from Indian side and the sources of historical sources of Sultanate. So they were sold, that's for sure.
Thank you.
All right. So it's high time maybe to put together this information from this end, from the, yeah?
Right.
Okay.
Thank you.
Next question is from Kofi Sarpongji. Kofi, why don't you ask your question directly to Dr. Rotaru? Okay, he's not speaking, so I'll read the question. Do Roma people have some local language links to Sanskrit words? Are there also cultural links to land of Bharat?
Culture, yes. Language is Indo-Aryan language. It's Neo-Indo-Aryan language, so it's sister of Hindi, Marathi, Gujarati, all the modern languages which we have nowadays in India. Is the only Neo-Indo-Aryan languages which is spoken outside of India. Of course, I'm not talking about the modern diaspora and other diasporas. Romani language has been developed for instance, the various dialects of spoken in Europe. So definitely, it's not outsourcing of Sanskrit, but of Prakrit.
Oh, okay.
Like all Indian languages, Neo and Indian languages, they come from Prakrits, not from Sanskrit. Sanskrit is a language which was codified by Panini and remained like that. It did not produce how should I say, other languages, so to say, but Prakrits, yes. So it is, and it's visible in their language. For instance, Trishul is Trishula. It has become cross. So now talking about syncretism, it kept the meaning of a religious object, Trishul, but it acquired the new meaning, cross, the Christian cross. So yes, thank you for the question.
Okay, thank you very much. I asked that because when I did a few research into Ghana slavery and the Jamaicans, we find out that there are some people who are living in some part of Jamaica, they still speak one of the Ghana languages. And up until now, they still have it there. So that's why I asked. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Kofi. Next question is from Michelle Salman Fisher, who has two questions. Michelle, do you want to come on camera and ask the question directly?
No, I would allow you to ask on my behalf if it's okay.
Okay. So the first question is, what do you hope to achieve with your research and how has it affected the stigma of Roma people throughout the world?
Through this particular study, because my research, it's multidisciplinary indeed. from Sanskrit, from Vedic, in fact, from 1500 before Christ, and various culture. Yeah, and Roma. But with this particular research on Roma slavery, what I achieved was already a better definition of Roma slavery. Yes, terminology. Yeah, with our published results and the truth.
I think that's the last very important point that you have said, that speaking the truth is very important. Researching the truth is very
and for
important.
Indian culture, it's important. It's even written in their anthem and on the flag. Yeah.
Okay. Yes, you're right.
The
So
Indians should be the truth keepers.
okay. The second question from Michelle is, what do you think can be done for Roma communities to consider having alliances with other oppressed groups? Roma people seem to stay within their own communities. And lastly, how are Roma communities receiving your research?
It happens, or maybe it doesn't happen, but it's a reality. I'm the General Secretary of the Gypsy Law Society, which is the oldest academic organization in the world, which was established in 1888 in United Kingdom. It has shifted its quarter in New York. It's registered in New York. So I'm the General Secretary, and the Vice Presidents is two Vice Presidents are of Romani extraction, Liliana Kovacheva and Hristo Kuchukov. So my work, I think it's well received because I am elected actually in this position as an officer. So I'm elected by the members, and most of our members are Roma scholars, and not only scholars, members of the organization who and if you ask why we call it Gypsy, because it's very sensitive and very pejorative, and it has a lot of negative connotation. It acquired a connotation over the centuries. We have preserved this appellation because it's historical. It's Gypsy Law Society was founded in 19th century, and we cannot change the brand, but we maintain it due to a questionnaire which we sent to the Roma communities, and they asked to be kept this way because not all of them, at least in Europe, they don't accept the umbrella term of Roma. They have various ethnic names, and they don't feel represented by the appellation of Roma, which unfortunately nowadays is also coined with stereotypes, and due to migration and corridors of poverty from linking Romania, Bulgaria to welfare countries. Did I answer your question, Michelle Selman-Fischer?
No, you did not. I'm asking you with regards to alliances, because there's typically strength in numbers. So I know that this is a pervasive experience of many Roma people, and I'm just curious if any alliance outside of Roma communities would strengthen the impact of getting the reparations and recognition.
What kind of alliance do you mean? Well, I haven't seen, so far I haven't seen such alliances. So I know there is a group in Harvard around this center, around the medical school of Harvard, who has the same topic. And yes, no, I don't think they are, they have obtained or they are seeking such alliances. But
I think the topic of Roma slavery is fairly new for academicians, and to mainstream it in the university and higher academic setups will require some time. And yes, there is scope for academic collaboration at this point in time, which will possibly lead to trickle-down effect in terms of communities having, political alliances for grassroots work.
okay.
But it is too soon an idea but maybe the time has come. The next question is from Dr. Anshu Vasishtha. Anshu, do you want to come on camera and ask the question directly to Dr. Rotaru?
I can try. Yeah, my question was simply to try and elaborate between the relationship of the Roma and the Gypsy terms. Because one of the about marriages, it talked about marriages between the two, and I was not totally sure about how they relate.
Vasishta ji, you mean you want a clarification on the ethnonym Gypsy, right? The ethnonym Gypsy, it's not even an ethnonym. It just came upon the heads of these people of Indo-Aryan origin they call themselves various names. One of them was Domba. No, the etymology accepted for Rom is from the Sanskrit Domba, which is a particular class of acrobats, social professional group, not only acrobats, and nowadays there are many Doms, Dom, da with the retroflex, da. Many Dom tribes in India. We don't know if we can trace them, the Roma of nowadays, to these various Doms of India who speaks a variety of languages, some of them Dravidian languages. We have Dom community speaking Telugu in south of India and so on. There is an extensive work on anthropological encyclopedia of Indian people published, 20 volumes or so about, and Dom has many entries in this encyclopedia. So this is the meaning of Roma. It's traced back to the Sanskrit etymon Domba, about Gypsy. And Tsigan in Romanian comes from Atinhanos. It's a Greek appellation which came upon the head of the Romani people in Byzance. So they are thus cited in the first ever mention of Roma people in Europe, in Byzance, in 1100, in a book called Life of Saint George of Athos. Then there were in 19th century the tribes of worshippers of Ahura Mazda, so Zoroastrians, who were a sect of Zoroastrians who were Atihanoi, untouchable for religious reasons. So this is the origin, the etymology of Tsigan, untouchable. But in the positive sense, in the beginning, out of religious purpose, no lo mi tangere, don't touch me. And it was converted as a negative term. And as I said, it's an umbrella term. It's not really accepted by all Roma in Europe. For instance, Sinte and Manouche of France, they don't even consider, some of them, that they have the same ethnic origin as Roma, hailing nowadays from Romania and from Bulgaria. I'm talking about a particular situation in Paris, for instance. Or Calais of Finland, or Calais in Sweden. They also think that they have nothing in common with the Roma hailing nowadays with the wave of the big migration from Eastern Europe to these welfare countries. Yes, although they have the same language. So.
Thank you. Thank you.
Dr. Rotaru, my understanding is that etymologically the word gypsy was a European term under a false belief that these people, the Roma people, originated from Egypt. So the people coming from Egypt were called gypsies. Am I correct in my presumption? Because that's usually given as a European labeling of this group that came from outside Europe.
Yes, you are correct in your assumption, because actually this is the narrative which the Roma themselves they created in the beginning when they appeared in Western Europe. They said that they are pilgrims and they are coming from Egypt. Yes, there is this, so it's their own narratives which has been created. But the term itself doesn't have anything pejorative. It's fine. It's no Egypt. It's fine. It's a toponym, toponymical, but it is so much burdened with negativity. So we have to avoid using it.
Dr. Rotaru, you just mentioned about the Kaoli people in Sweden. Does that refer to the color of the skin, since you know Hindi and Sanskrit?
Of course, you are correct. Actually, Sinte, if you dare to think further, you may connect it to Sindus, to Indus. Yes, and you are correct.
Okay.
Absolutely. This is an Indian ethnic names. So as you can see, the names are very telling about various vagues of migration when they came in from India. Yes, that's the meaning. And there is Kalo, Kali, Kale, the adjective which means black in Romani language. Actually, if you allow me a small parenthesis, this is the difference between the Roma who settled historically in Western Europe and Eastern Europe. In Western Europe, there was this institutional fence because the Western countries, they had states with legislation, with institutions. And Roma people, they were, marginalized. Also in Eastern Europe, they were marginalized. But here they kept their traditions and names. See, Sinte, Manush, what is Manush? You connect it with the right Sanskrit word and here we are. So they kept their ethnic names. What happened with their ethnic names in my country, in Bulgaria? They are all lost. They borrowed the name of profession names. For instance, my friend and vice president of Gypsy Law Society is Kovacheva, which means blacksmith, but in Bulgarian. So they converted. See, yes.
I don't see any more questions in the chat room. It was a very fascinating, very interesting discussion and highly educated for us, because the issue of Roma slavery has not been talked about. Issue of Roma persecution is talked about, but there are different dimensions. Specifically, slavery has not been talked about. So I really, really applaud you for mainstreaming the academic research on this particular topic. And I hope that, yes, we do indulge in the exercise of speaking the truth. This series of lectures is called Speaking Up Series. We are not telling a tale, we are not telling the truth, we are speaking the truth, and you are contributing to this in an academic manner, and I applaud you for that. This is your first presentation on our platform, but we hope that you will be coming to our platform more often.
Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Dr. Julieta Rotaru.
Satyam eva jayate.
Namaskar.
Namaskar.
And this presentation and discussion would be available on our website and on our YouTube channel within the next 24 hours. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Okay. Namaskar.
Thank you all.